Dr. Usman, what's your take on the taxation and expanding the tax base, and especially let's start from the agriculture sector and the tax that is being proposed. How government is going to be implementing that, and what challenges do you foresee in this sector?
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. The agricultural element is quite significant in the staff level agreement. I presume that there will be an exemption for very small scale farmers in the same way that you have an exemption for very low income earners in any tax schedule. So I'm not so concerned about that. I think it may disincentivize the collectivization of farming, so expanding the scale. And I wonder how corporate farming plans to deal with that. But if corporate farming expands and it is in the tax net, it would be very good because agriculture is a very significant employer and it's still a very large percentage of the share of the value in GDP. So you have to do something about it. You can't just leave it out there and continue to pressurize the salaried class, for example. But taxation also has some other elements according to the staff level agreement, which are very good, part of your question. So for example, they're talking about trying to rebalance the national fiscal pact or the fiscal federalism so that the provinces become revenue collection parts and not just the spending units, and that the provinces use that taxation properly, and that the federation isn't kept hollow. These things are not given as much weight in the staff level agreement memo, the transcript of it, but they could be really wonderful for Pakistan if we start to balance things out like that. And
Exactly.
another
Start to
area.
balance remains the key question. But Dr. Usman, I'll let you complete your thoughts. But at the same time, what challenges do you foresee when we talk about, of course, the provinces and the implementation of expanding the tax base?
It's a very good question. What I was saying is that electricity and energy and other things are also mentioned in here. So overall, that it's a very good thing on the taxation side, and good in the sense of being very comprehensive. But then you're correct to point to the challenges, and I think that challenges are not so big a deal when we are in so unique a position. You see, so now is the time where I think many stakeholders have come around to realize that things cannot go on as they have, and so I think now is the right time to do it. The challenges you would normally foresee involve political vested interests, hampering any implementation and that sort of thing. But I think there is broad-based understanding across the political spectrum that everybody needs to muster and husband their resources appropriately in the national interest. So now the similar challenges that I would have foreseen are not so strong, and I think it's a good time for reform.
Right. So, Dr. Usman, when we talk about the energy reforms, can you tell us what energy reforms are included in this specific agreement and how they will be implemented to boost the energy sector?
There is quite a bit that is covered in the staff level agreement about electricity. And what it says is that your subsidies in this area are not feasible or sustainable. So what you're talking about is the tariff rationalization. You're talking about all sorts of grants that you give, as well as the generation element of it. So what the staff level agreement says is that the unnecessary generation stuff needs to be stopped. You need to minimize fiscal risk through the adjustment of energy tariffs. You need to have decisive cost reducing reforms, and you have to refrain from unnecessary expansion of generation capacity. These are the sorts of things that we have to think about, because now is a time where Pakistanis are adopting renewable energy, and now is a time where on-site generation is happening. What we really need to focus is on transmission and also on the sources. So rather than using non-renewable hydrocarbons, we should be thinking more about hydronuclear and solar. These sorts of things come through into the staff level agreement, because it's saying if you have these fossil fuel type things, you will have to raise the rates, and you have been boosting your generation capacity, but you haven't thought about the transmission stuff enough. So what it's saying is you really need to look at this as an area within your budget architecture where provincially and federally you are hemorrhaging money. So stop doing it. And I think that's very good.
And Dr. Usman, let's talk about macroeconomic stability. How does this specific IMF program aim to support long-term macroeconomic stability?
There's two ways that it's trying to do that. The first is that it's helping you to shore up your reserves because it's been a very difficult time globally. Pakistan is not that exceptional in terms of the difficulties faced on the cost of living crisis or in terms of its revenues and its foreign reserves dwindling. That's not unusual. So what it's saying is it will help you to shore up in this difficult time, and as global interest rates go down and economic activity globally picks up, you'll be ready to hit the ground running. So that's very good. The other thing that it's doing is it's asking you to look hard at your budget and the structure of it. Unfortunately, I don't think we've done enough in this last budget in terms of the reforms, the heavy-handed reforms. What we have done is pick the low-hanging fruit, like the salaried class and indirect taxes. And I think that that's unfortunate because this is an opportunity, and the next budget will also be an opportunity. As long as we're in this staff level agreement and then it's approved by the board, as long as we're in this process, we have a chance to do serious reform that brings in undertaxed sectors or consider taxation or consider targeted spending, etc., etc. There's so many things that we can do that we have yet to do.
Right, and what are key indicators for the success of this 7 billion agreement over the next 37 months, and how they will be measured?
Not enough on the transparency and accountability of how we spend it, but that's not as important as the reforms that we take, which are measurable. So, for example, you will have a list of state-owned enterprises you have divested. You will have the revenue collection figures from your revenue collecting authorities, etc., etc. So what you would end up doing is you would triangulate from all of these things whether you have done enough on your side or not, and that would be the equivalent of how 7 billion has been spent indirectly.
Right, and let's talk about how they will be measured, especially in the next 1 year.
More specifically, you would see the privatization proceeds, you would see how the electricity tariff has gone up, you would see indirect taxation, the figures of that, you would see the direct things, taxation figures, you would see how many taxpayers are brought into the net, you would see how much has been sent to the provinces, you would try to examine how the provinces are spending that money, which is, I think, the biggest problem with our fiscal architecture. So you would look at all of these things over 1 year and say, well, I think we've come quite far ahead or not.
Right, right. And, Dr. Usman, how do you see that? What lessons can Pakistan learn from previous 23 IMF programs that can be applied to the current program to ensure the success of this program?
That's a very good way to look at it, is that why have we gone through so many programs and yet we're back there again? The truth is that we haven't completed the vast majority of the programs in any meaningful sense, and that's why we end up going back. Were we to implement this one to the fullest extent, it is unlikely we would need to go in the future. But already I'm seeing that we may not do this to the fullest extent, and therefore you open the door to further episodes with the IMF, which I discourage. I think that we should be a self-sustaining and dynamic economy that doesn't require any sort of external assistance because it has enough reserves, enough dynamism, enough openness to deal with its own problems. And I think that now the time is coming where we certainly do need a conclusion to IMF engagement. Why? Because the more we do this, the more programs we do, the worse the conditionalities get. The people are put under increasing and increasing pressure with every program. So I think that this cycle needs to stop, and for that you really have to see this program through the end, unlike the previous ones.
Right, and what are some of the challenges that you foresee, or what are the major risks that you foresee for the successful implementation of this program, and how they could be mitigated?
The biggest challenge I see is that political vested interests may prevent things from being fully realized to their extent. So, for example, we are taking difficult measures at various levels. If we are unable to see them through completion, it is very likely because political vested interests or narrow economic interests got in the way. I think that the time for such vested interests has expired. In fact, it expired 30 years ago. So I think that that challenge remains. The other thing is perhaps the global economic recovery will not happen as well as is now being forecast, for example, as is implied by the US Fed or other monitoring bodies and other decision-making bodies. If the economy starts to go globally in the opposite direction after the soft landing we have been expected, that will make it very hard, not just for Pakistan, but for many other countries which are now expecting things, this 5-year period of COVID and post-COVID, to finally subside so that we can attain normal trajectories that we had in the previous decade. So that's the other big risk.
Right. And what role do you see of CPEC and other investments from the Gulf region for, of course, achieving the economic stability over the past, of course, next 37, over the next or coming 37 months period?
Yes, investment is very, very important, but it has to be in the right areas. So, for example, now there is a lot of discussion about why we have so many IPPs and that sort of thing. So, I think that investments, if they are G to G, government to government, they have to be very well thought out and they need inputs from multiple stakeholders in Pakistan. They cannot be just top-down decisions that then become a source of political acrimony. That's one thing. The second thing is that Pakistan should be open to investment from all over the world, not just from, quote, friendly countries, but we have to be an open economy that is a good place to do business for everyone. And finally, I believe that rather than seeking out international investment from people who can switch easily between Pakistan and any other country, we have to tap into the capital of the overseas Pakistanis, capital not just monetarily, but the human capital, the network capital, and all the capital, because overseas Pakistanis are a very amazing group of people in the world. And this is not, they're not being channeled into Pakistan's development now in the same way that they should have been. And I think that will be the ultimate source of our development, not these other countries.
Right. Usman, coming back to the structural reforms, can you tell us some of the structural reforms that Pakistan needs at this point in time to break the cycle of boom and bust?
There are three areas that in my analysis I have come across that we really need to look at carefully, and I don't think they're covered enough in public discourse or even in research. The first one is the immediate transfer that the federation makes to the provinces. It collects all the revenue and they do the spending. And I think this is a terrible model. Instead, the provinces need to be revenue raising things, or whether it's agriculture, property tax, or whatever. And the federation itself should not be the sole revenue generator. That's the one structural reform I contend. The second one is on the borrowing that we do. The borrowing that we have done recently has been largely from the domestic banking system, and the domestic banking system makes record profits quarter after quarter. This is very unfortunate because this sector does not reflect the economy as a whole. So I think that there's serious work to be done on the borrowing structure within this. And the third is that we have a lot of like frivolous expenditures when you come to the subsidies, the grants, transfers, even the development, public sector development program. There's a lot of like frivolity and political decision making happening there that is not in the national interest per se, but it's just to appease certain interest groups. So I think if you tackle these three areas already, and some of it is covered substantially in the IMF agreement, but not all of it, if you do this, you would already see a tremendous balancing within the economy, and that would also facilitate the private sector, not just make it a narrower and more efficient public sector, but the private sector would also benefit enormously from this.
Right, right. And Dr. Usman, very briefly tell us, what is your vision for Pakistan's long-term economic stability?
In the long run, I would aspire that Pakistan resembles many other Asian tigers. And what I mean by that is that they are very apolitical, very dynamic, very open economies that are competing based on the quality of their products, and they specialize in certain things but also cover the immediate domestic needs. So it's a balanced economy, it's a sustainable economy, it's a dynamic economy, and it is a participant in global economic affairs and a leader in science and technology, that sort of thing. And that vision therefore requires a lot of hard work, but it is certainly within the purview of our potentiality that we accomplish this sort of thing within a generation, so long as vested political interests get out of the way, so long as talent and merit is equated to capital, and so long as we hold the people accountable who are in decision making for the interest of the economy. That is the substance of my vision over a generation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Usman Chohan, for joining us in today's program. Of course, when we look ahead, Pakistan's economic stability is fraught with challenges when we talk about implementation of this IMF program as well, but with strategic vision, this is attainable. That's all from Game Changer tonight. Take care. Allah Hafiz.